The courtroom fell into a silence so heavy, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath, as Angela Carter stood trembling before a judge, who looked at her not as a human being fighting for her child, but as a nuisance interrupting his morning. Her hands were clasped so tightly together that her knuckles had turned pale, and tears were already sliding down her cheeks before she had even spoken a single word. In less than a minute, everything she had worked for, sacrificed for, and prayed for was about to be torn apart in front of strangers who would never know her story, her pain, or the truth that was about to shatter the entire room into stunned silence. Angela had not slept the night before. She had spent it kneeling beside her daughter's bed, whispering promises she was terrified she might not be able to keep. She was 29 years old, a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. And yet somehow she had ended up here, in a courtroom, fighting to prove that she deserved to keep custody of the only person in the world who made her exhaustion feel worth it. The opposing side had money, lawyers, and sharp suits, and a story crafted to paint her as unfit, careless, and undeserving. All Angela had was the truth, a worn blue blouse, and a heart that refused to stop fighting. Before we go further into Angela's story, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that people who are struggling deserve to be seen and not judged, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, so you never miss a story like this one. When Angela finally stepped up to speak, her voice cracked before she even finished her first sentence. She explained how she had lost her apartment 8 months earlier after her landlord sold the building, how she had spent weeks sleeping in her car with her daughter wrapped in blankets in the back seat, and how she had clawed her way back into stability one shift, $1, one sacrifice at a time. She spoke about missing meals so her daughter never would, about walking 3 miles to work because she could not afford gas, about crying in bathroom stalls so her daughter would never see her break. But instead of compassion, she was met with a judge whose patience seemed to evaporate with every word she spoke. Judge Harold Whitmore had sat on that bench for over 20 years, and in that time he had built a reputation for being sharp, unshakable, and unwilling to be moved by emotional pleas. When Angela mentioned her financial struggles, his expression hardened. When she mentioned the shelter she had briefly stayed in, his jaw tightened. And when her voice broke while describing the fear of losing her daughter, he slammed his gavel down and told her, in front of the entire courtroom, that her tears would not change the facts, and that a woman who could not provide stability had no business raising a child alone. His words landed like physical blows. Angela's shoulders collapsed inward, and for a moment, it looked as though the last bit of strength in her body had disappeared entirely. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Some people looked away, uncomfortable witnessing a mother be humiliated so openly. Others shook their heads in disbelief at how cold the judge's tone had become. Angela's own lawyer, a young public defender named Rachel Simmons, who had taken the case pro bono, reached for Angela's trembling hand under the table, silently urging her to hold on just a little longer, because there was one piece of evidence they had not yet presented. One truth that could change everything. Rachel stood, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room, and asked the judge for permission to submit a final piece of testimony. What followed was a letter, handwritten by the very man who had once employed Angela's opposing party's witness, detailing months of manipulated pay records, falsified reports, and an attempt to discredit Angela simply because she had refused to stay silent about unsafe conditions at her former workplace. The letter revealed that the entire narrative painting Angela as unstable had been fabricated by someone who feared she would expose wrongdoing that could cost him everything. Angela had not been irresponsible. She had been targeted for being honest. The courtroom shifted. Whispers turned into stunned murmurs. Even the bailiff, who had stood emotionless throughout the entire hearing, visibly reacted, exchanging a glance with another officer near the door. For the first time since the hearing began, Judge Whitmore's expression faltered. The fury that had colored his face moments earlier gave way to something closer to disbelief, and then, slowly, to something that looked uncomfortably like shame. He called for a short recess, and when the court reconvened, his tone had changed entirely. He reviewed the letter again, cross-referenced dates, and called for verification from the State Labor Board, which confirmed the retaliation claims within the hour. The judge, A man who rarely admitted fault looked directly at Angela and acknowledged that the assumptions he had made about her character were unfair, and that the system had nearly failed a mother who had done nothing but try to protect her daughter and stand up for what was right. Angela did not celebrate. She did not smile in triumph. She simply closed her eyes, pressed her hands to her face, and let out the kind of sob that comes only after months of carrying a weight too heavy to name. It was not relief from winning a case. It was relief from finally being seen, finally being believed, finally being treated as a mother who mattered rather than a statistic to be dismissed. In the weeks that followed, custody was fully restored, and more than that, an investigation was launched into the workplace retaliation that had started the entire ordeal, giving Angela not just her daughter back, but her dignity, her voice, and a future she thought had been stolen from her. The story spread quietly through the community, not as a scandal, but as a reminder that sometimes the people who look the most broken in a courtroom are the ones fighting the hardest battles no one else can see. If this story touched your heart even a little, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that truth eventually finds its way to the light, even when the world seems determined to silence it. Before we go, if Angela's strength moved you, take a moment to comment below and share one word that describes how this story made you feel. Sometimes just reading how much a story mattered to someone else is enough to remind another struggling parent out there that they are not alone. Angela Carter's story is a reminder that resilience is not loud. It is quiet, persistent, and unwilling to give up even when the odds feel impossible. She did not need a courtroom to validate her worth as a mother, but when the truth finally emerged, it did more than clear her name. It restored her belief that justice, however delayed, still has the power to arrive exactly when it is needed most. This story is a work of fiction, created for emotional and inspirational storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is purely coincidental.